Welcome back again to part 7 of the World Peace Jubilee and indeed episode 31. This is the final 3 days. Certain aspects of the Jubilee had been an absolutely overwhelming success, but equally some parts of the Jubilee had been disastrous. Crowds had fluctuated, but even in the much shorter National Peace Jubilee in 1869, they had seen this could happen. 1872 was different. It had another variable, though, that they couldn't control in the realms of nature, and that was its heat. Records begin in Boston and are kept in Boston from 1893, but the general records for the region were kept in Philadelphia as far back as 1790. And according to their records, 1870 was the warmest so far that they had ever experienced. In fact, according to their records, the lowest temperatures during the period from June the 17th to July the 6th, or the length of the festival, was 88 degrees, rising to 94 degrees on June the 29th. Imagine the stifling heat, exaggerated by the contributing temperatures of over 20,000 choir and 1,000 orchestra, and indeed whatever number of tens of thousands were in the auditorium. It wouldn't be too difficult to predict a possible 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius at least in that building. No wonder there were reports of women fainting and people not wanting to come out, not because of the music, but because of the weather. So the temperatures were very high, and yet there were 3 more days to go, and the organizers were determined to maximize the financial returns from the event. So, likewise, let's get to it. Before, by the way, we continue, please click like and subscribe and share with your friends who have never heard of the event. And one other favor. If any of your family members back in the day, as they say, back in the generations, maybe you're from Massachusetts or throughout North America, and you have some record that your family attended this event, or indeed the previous Peace Jubilee, contact me. Maybe that they played a musical instrument. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe they sang in it. Maybe they have a concert ticket from it. My email is gilmoresband@gmail.com. So the first of these 3 days was entitled, first of all these days was the Great National Day on July the 4th. And it featured a potpourri of performances, and crowds began arriving for a series of 4 concerts that day from at 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 p.m., 6 p.m., and finally 9 p.m. until 12 o'clock that night. There aren't many reports of the proceedings that day, which makes you wonder how popular indeed this day actually was. It was also one of those very balmy days. Concert 1, the 9 o'clock one, featured Dan Godfrey and his wonderful Grenadier Guards and Herr Sarah with the Kaiser Franz Grenadier Guards from Prussia. Concert 2 at 2 p.m. featured Dan Godfrey once more, this time followed by Monsieur Paulus and the Band de la Garde Républicaine. The third concert at 6 p.m. featured two extremes of musical performance. The Irish National Guard, or Irish National Band, led by Edmund Clements, and Herr Strauss leading his magnificent orchestra with the Blue Danube and Herr Saro closing off the concert with three pieces from The Merry Wives of Windsor, German People's Song, and Le Revel du Lion. And finally, Concert 4 was really an alternative between the Band de la Garde Française and the Irish National Band, with the French playing Overture from Zampa, followed by an air varia for soloists in the band, and then the Fantasia, Robert Diable, while the Irish had Kate Carney, Éireann Gobra, and Gems of Ireland. July the 5th was indeed the benefit to the Band de la Garde Républicaine, acclaimed by the press as the greatest band of the International Musical Festival. The program consisted mainly of the Overture by Auber, Lucrezia Borgia by Donizetti, Lohengrin by Wagner, William Tell, Rossini, Cornet solo, unknown, Torchlight March from Meyerbeer, and L'Appel du Régiment from Léon Monguier. And finally, on July the 6th, the concert featured the genius of Johann Strauss and his wonderful band, assisted by Irishman P S Gilmore for Strauss's benefit. Each piece would be alternatively conducted by Gilmore then Strauss, with obvious alternatives offered on accompaniment and indeed on Strauss's compositions. But what seemed to be clear is that a wonderful evening was had by all, including the sometimes tempestuous Herr Strauss himself. For the record, Strauss played Wine Women's Song, followed by Circassian March, Annen Polka, and ended with Kunster Lieben for the complete concert. Other than a noted final concert, which no one seems to have any details of, for the Irish band, and for which I have my doubts that it even continued, I believe that the Strauss Benefit Waltz was indeed the final curtain of the World Peace Jubilee event. Now, finally, this marathon of all musical distance competitions was at an end at last, and assessments now would have to be made. Before we do that, please click subscribe and share with your friends. And again, if you have any knowledge, contact me. July the 18th, the New York papers, particularly the Tribune, continued to debate the possibilities of such an event taking place in Gotham City. There was little doubt that the will to stage such an event in the city did not measure up to the size of the project. But now, in July 1872, P S Gilmore was also aware that the recent poor performance of all American bands in the World Peace Jubilee would necessitate a complete reorganization of all American musical structure in order to improve. New standards would be set, and these would have to be surpassed. His own organization, though the most popular in America, had to be redeveloped, and he also knew that the Marine Band was even further behind. In the World Peace Jubilee, they were criticized as being amateurs with limited repertoire and abilities, and although his personal popularity amongst the audience never waned, the World Peace Jubilee, from Gilmore's perspective, was an abject failure in performance, but an outstanding success on information required for future improvements and successes. Typical of Gilmore, his focus was now on the correction of the faults of the past and a focus to future developments. Financially, the final numbers weren't in and are publicized as yet, but internationally the telegraphs were still buzzing. And for instance, in the Glasgow Herald, for example, on the 22nd of July, they suggested that the Boston, Massachusetts Jubilee had achieved the biggest ever in musical history that had ever been achieved. People suggested this was predicted as a disaster, and yet it wasn't. The Jubilee had been a success, one paper said. Musical effects had been achieved and never produced before. A great impulse had been given to the musical culture of this country, and a higher achievement established. 3 eminent pianists played in the intervals during the Jubilee, but their efforts were almost thrown away in a building like the Colosseum, however masterly. The cornet quartet of Kaiser Wilhelm have also appeared several times, but their music is better adapted to a small auditorium. The grand features of the Jubilee were the chorals, rendered by 20,000 singers and Madame Peischke Leitner, and the music of the foreign bands. The article continued. The financial results have not been profitable for the expenses, which have been enormous. The projectors have, however, the satisfaction of a great achievement, which has many thousands of delighted auditorium listeners and added to the glory of Boston. That was in the Hawaiian Gazette of August 7th. Finally, it had been a disaster. The project development had been inflated by a larger Colosseum with more supplies, more materials, and huge storms that had leveled the project just a few weeks before completion. Then they had to double up in the shifts to make up for lost time, rejig the plans of the smaller 1869 Colosseum, and restart most of the early project, including the complete reprint of all ticket allocations never used. Then, of course, there were the too many days by far. But maybe someone suggested if you ask the Europeans to come for the initial weeks of concerts, there's little likelihood that they'll come at all. And so maybe someone set out a decided compromise. But still there were the oratorio days, which seemed to drag out the sustained note further than thought previously. Yet this even had a valuable aim of offering a choral fest so that those in attendance, in other words, those in the gigantic choir, could capture the essence of the purity of choral performance, a skill and a talent to be aimed for by all learning this wonderful craft from the Jubilee. Finally, there were the absolute gems of performance from the Jubilee, the lessons of fear and hate from the audience, and the wonderful response of talent from the singers. Next week, we'll visit the equal of a congressional enactment at the Jubilee. So click and like and subscribe and contact me if you have any questions. Finally, from Gilmore's perspective, he was elated and depressed and shocked, but he saw the potential of the project. How could he feel down? He was charging like a weak battery to create the energy levels he would need to develop his plan of musical development and renewal over the next few years as a result of this event. He had heard the greatest, he had learned, and he had seen from the best. And now one thing was sure: America musically would never, ever be as weak again as it was in this Jubilee. He would make sure of it. So thank you all, and see you next week. Regards from me. Bye.